Welcome to the Train of Death's 10-man Lich King fight. This is on normal, and we are using one Death Knight tank as an off-tank, a Paladin tank as the main tank, and the rest of the group comprised of various healers and DPS. Now, the fight has a couple phases. Phase 1, as you can see, the main tank just takes Lich King a little bit away from the raid, and the off-tank stands a little bit separate from the range group. Melee DPS can go ahead and stay on the Lich King. The off-tank will be taking all the adds to pop up, both the Shambling Horrors, which are the big red guys that you can see right now, and the little Drudge Ghouls, which are the little guys that Lich King will spawn around himself. The Shambling Horrors spawn at random locations, whereas the Drudge Ghouls will always spawn on Lich King. It's not that hard to pick them up and keep them in one location, but the one important thing is the Shambling Horrors have to be tanked with them facing away from the raid, because they do a shockwave attack, which they just did, which causes a large amount of frontal AoE, and it makes the group unhappy. Now, the mechanic of this fight that's relatively different on this phase is the Lich King casts a debuff, a disease, on a single member of the raid. The debuff does a relatively large amount of damage, and if dispelled off of the person, will bounce to the nearest other person. Also, if the debuff kills somebody, it will bounce to the nearest person and it will grow bigger. So, right there, as you can see, when somebody gets the disease, they run from whatever group they're in, whether it's range or melee. They run to right behind the Shambling Horrors, where they are cleansed, and the disease will bounce from them to the range group. Now, phase 1, this is all this is. You're just sitting here. DPS does not worry about the Shambling Horrors. They don't worry about the Drudge Ghouls. All DPS is doing is burning down Lich King. At 70%, Lich King will run to the middle, which you'll see in just a minute. What we were doing on this fight is we were getting the I've been waiting a long time for this achievement. This achievement involves letting the Necrotic Plague, which is the disease debuff, to stack up to 30 and then kill the Lich King. Now, as you can see, Necrotic Plague is about to be cast, and it is cast on the off-tank, which makes things relatively simple because the off-tank just has to be cleansed, and it will bounce to the nearest mob. Now, as you can see, the mobs are surrounding the off-tank right now. Necrotic Plague, when it's dispelled or when it kills the person that has it, will bounce to the nearest other character, whether that's a bad guy or a good guy. So it would be a bad idea for the off-tank to be surrounded by the mobs, because if one person behind you dies with the Necrotic Plague, it will bounce to you, as you can see it just did. The Necrotic Plague does a stupid amount of damage when it stacks up that high, so if it's not cleansed off the off-tank, if it does happen to get on, the off-tank will be one-shot. The Necrotic Plague right now is stacked up to 24, and it does approximately 1.5 million damage. Now, this is the last Shambling Horror that you're going to see, because the Lich King is about to flip to we'll call it Phase 1.5. Phase 1.5 is just an orb fight, and you'll see it in a minute. This is the last set of Drudge Ghouls you're going to see before Phase 1.5, because the Lich King runs right into the middle, as you see. Now, as the Lich King runs into the middle, there's a couple of things. The off-tank will probably still be tanking a couple adds. The second the last add dies, the off-tank needs to be cleansed. If the off-tank isn't cleansed immediately after that last add dies, the off-tank will die, and then you'll be, SOL. Over in the melee group, it's not really a melee and ranged anymore. Over in the melee group, you can see the main tank is taking a little Raging Spirit. The Raging Spirits spawn at predetermined times during these 60-second phases. Phase 1.5 is 60 seconds long. During this phase, the off-tank and the tank pick up the Raging Spirits, and they tank the Raging Spirits facing away from the raid, because the Raging Spirits do a frontal cone AoE damage and silence attack. 1 or 2 ranged, if your ranged don't do a lot of damage, are DPSing the orbs as they come flying out from Lich King. If one of those orbs hits one of the raid members, it throws them so far that you won't see them again till you wipe the raid. Now, after approximately 60 seconds, the Lich King is going to go into Phase 2. If the Raging Spirits aren't dead at this time, they need to be DPS'd before everybody picks back up on the Lich King. In Phase 2, there are two mechanics that the raid has to worry about. One is the Valkyrs, and two is the Defile. The raid needs to be clustered in the middle of the platform. The Valkyr, when it pops, will target a random toon in the raid. It will go pick up that person, and then it will fly the shortest route it can take to the outside. The second mechanic is the Defile. The Defile gets cast on a random raid member by the Lich King, and the second it's cast, when it's dispelled, it drops a little debuff on that character. Or excuse me, not dispelled, but after about a half a second, it drops off that character and it drops a pool on the ground. That pool grows larger for every person that it damages. So if you've got one person who won't walk out of that pool, the pool will take up the entire platform. Defile and the Valkyr will often come at the same time, which means that your raid has to be in the middle and ready to bounce out at any given time. All DPS should flip to the Valkyr when it pops out, because the Valkyr will carry somebody off of the platform. If they carry them off of the platform, there is no battle res. There is no way to get them back into the fight. Defile and the Valkyr are the two big things in this phase. Now for you tanks out there, the second the Lich King gets done casting Defile, his next melee attack, he's going to cast something called Soul Reaper on whatever tank he has targeted. That Soul Reaper, after a couple seconds, will do about 50,000-60,000 damage. Now, that Soul Reaper could be healed through if your tanks are pretty good, they have a fair amount of health, and if your healers are on their game. But it's much easier for you to have the other tank taunt the Lich King and take the Lich King's damage while the other tank takes just the Soul Reaper damage. Now, one thing I didn't mention is, at different times in the fight, Lich King will cast Infest on different raid members. Infest is a debuff that will just gradually damage people, and it will pick up more and more damage over time. Infest, the only way to get rid of it is to top a character off with healing. I think they can have like 5% health gone. That was the Infest you just saw right there. Now, as you can see, everybody's stacked in the middle because the Valkyr is about to come down, but we just hit Phase 2.5. Phase 2.5 is the exact same thing as Phase 1.5, with all the characters on the outside of the rim. Now, I did not mention that if the characters are not on the outside of the rim, they take large amounts of damage from the Lich King's debuff. So everybody needs to be on the outside of the rim. The second the phase ends, the rim disappears and drops off, so if you don't move to the inside, you all die. So here the tanks are picking up the Raging Spirits, and they're tanking the Raging Spirits facing away from the raid, while one or two DPS are working on the orbs. The Raging Spirits, after the 4.0 patch hit, DPS should be high enough that you don't really have to worry about Raging Spirits too much. So, when Phase 2.5 ends, by the way, we pop Hero in Phase 2.5 to allow us to burn through the Raging Spirits, so we don't have to worry about them when Phase 3 hits. Phase 3 starts at 40%. That's when he goes to that's when you have to go to the outside of the platform the second time. So now Lich King is at 40%. You mop up the Raging Spirits, and at this time, you don't have to worry about Valkyrs anymore. You still have to worry about Defile, but you don't have to worry about Valkyrs. Now, in the third phase, there are two new mechanics. One is something called Harvest Soul, and the other one is something called Vital Spirits. Harvest Soul, the Lich King will cast on a random raid member. When Harvest Soul is cast on that raid member, they, after about 6 seconds of fair amounts of damage, are teleported to the inside of the tomb with the NPC. At that time, if they're DPS, they need to DPS the boss in there. However, they need to wait until the NPC in there gets aggro. If they're heals, keep the person alive, and if they are a tank, well, tanks don't get ported in. So, keep the person with Harvest Soul alive until they go into the portal, and then they're on their own. The second mechanic is the Vital Spirits. At certain times, he will cast Vital Spirits, and a whole bunch of little spirits will appear on the platform. They don't have a lot of life. All the ranged, when the Vital Spirits come down, need to turn and nuke the Vital Spirits. because they will target random raid members and approach them. When they approach them, if they get near them, they will explode, as you saw that one just do. When they explode, they do a little amount of damage. One by itself isn't a big deal, but if you're not DPSing them, you'll get 6 or 7 target one person, and they'll die. Now, Defile is still happening in the third phase, and Infest is still happening in the third phase. So healers during this phase are really having a fun time. The tanks take Lich King. The way we did it was we took him around the outside of the circle, and we just tanked him moving to allow the Vile Spirits to be DPS before they got to raid members. Now, the entire raid is just kind of shuffling around in a counterclockwise pattern on the ring. And as you can see, the Lich King is approaching 10%. When the Lich King approaches 10%, he enters phase who freaking cares because he's dead. At 10%, the Lich King is a free kill. He will kill you. Now, as you can see, the tank just got Defile, and he placed the Defile in the path of the raid. When that happens, just move around it. If your raid is retarded and they stand in fire, then you probably won't kill the Lich King. If your raid can maneuver, so as I said, at 10% the Lich King will kill the entire raid, and after a little while, a fair amount of roleplay, because the Lich King outside his crusty cold exterior has the heart of a 13-year-old girl, so after about a minute and a half of roleplay, you'll get resurrected and you'll be able to have a free beating on the Lich King. I deleted all that for your convenience because it's freaking boring. And after that, you can watch the cinematic and loot the boss. Happy hunting. Praise to the Train of Death.